leadership. It's not one reporting into the other. It's not somebody paying the money, therefore they are the boss. It's that collaborative leadership which not only Marks and Spencer has shown with Swasti, but Swasti has shown with the community leadership, right? And the humble audacity, our audacity of setting the goal where we set out when we started off to that intentional question is very critical, and the spirit of generosity. And the spirit of generosity was felt at every turn, whether it is some of the challenges we faced or during COVID time. The spirit of generosity shown by the community in terms of looking after each other. I just want to draw these 4 values which we talk about in Catalyst 2013. If I were to look back, I think this is one of those programs which actually managed to practice many of these.
Thank you so much, Shiv. I think that was very relevant to what we're talking about today. Thank you so much. Ranjit, would you like to weigh in on this question about, intentional partnership and intentional collaboration? What was your approach?
I think I'll echo to most what Shiv has shared, but intentional partnership and intentional collaboration is embarked upon when you look at end goals, which are holistic and also achievable. And I think trust actually plays a very important role there. And that's the thing, when during the first year, when we thought maybe we look at one approach, and then maybe in the second year when we again looked at maybe this approach is not working, maybe let's look something else. But one thing was very clear was within a year, we were also looking at some low-hanging fruits. For example, the level of interest which we saw from the community. So there was some level of understanding and interest that something good is happening. The fact that of course, Smriti will be able to tell us more, but the fact that we did not see too much of what do you call it? Too much of a resistance, if I may use the word, from the community, which means that the first year, even though the model in our mind wasn't that perfect in terms of the community's access to formal healthcare, but setting up a wellness center was a good choice to go with. That was what we actually looked at. So from that perspective, things were working. So we thought maybe it makes sense to actually walk this path. And then that faith and that trust and of course the partnership finally showed that this is a scalable, replicable, and a very beneficial model that would actually go a long way. I think it is ready, and maybe the next step could be to look at how it works in a factory setting, for example, a manufacturing sector setting. Maybe move beyond the garment sector, but at least maybe to try it out in the garment sector, and the fact that it has replicated well in other places. So yeah, I mean, it really works well, and that's where the intent comes in. I think intent comes with the experience.
Very interesting. We're getting some great questions from the audience, so please keep them flowing in. Before we just get to the audience question, I'd like to go back to Pooja Devi. Pooja Devi जी, पिछले 6 साल में जो भी आपने काम किया है, जो आपने जर्नी बताई समिति के, आगे जाके स्वस्ति जैसे संस्था या MNS जैसे संस्था से आपकी अपेक्षा क्या है?
बिल्कुल, 6 साल के जो हमने जर्नी आपको बताया, ऐसे तो मतलब बहुत कम शब्द है कि हम 6 साल की जर्नी यूं 2-4 शब्दों में बता सकें, पर अपेक्षा वही है। 6 साल में जो हमने जर्नी किया, जो हमने काम किया, मैं भी एक छोटे से ग्रुप की एक सदस्य थी। फिलहाल आपके साथ बात करूंगी एक बोर्ड सदस्य के नाते। मुझे लगता है कि हमारे एसकेएस जैसी कई सारी संस्थाएं हैं जो समुदाय में कुछ बदलाव लाने के लिए, कुछ अलग ही एक, जो सरकार तो ऐसे बहुत सारी स्कीम पे काम कर रही है, बहुत सारी सुविधाएं दे रही है, पर वो सुविधा क्या हमारे समुदाय में पहुंच पा रहे, नहीं पा रहे। इस उद्देश्य के साथ न जाने कितनी सारी संस्थाएं हैं जो समुदाय में काम कर रही हैं, पर एक जो सपोर्ट होता है, जो अपेक्षा है, वो सपोर्ट इस तरीके का हो। आर्थिक सपोर्ट चाहिए होता है, क्योंकि किसी भी काम को करने के लिए हमें पैसों की जरूरत पड़ती है। फिलहाल तब तक तो जरूर ही पड़ती है जब तक कि वो संस्था खुद सक्षम ना हो जाए अपना कुछ मतलब अपने बल पे खड़े होने के लिए। लेकिन आर्थिक के साथ साथ उन्हें कई तरीके की सपोर्ट चाहिए होते हैं। उन्हें एक बड़े जो संस्थाएं होती हैं, बड़े जो स्तर पे लोग होते हैं, उनको तो सब जानते हैं, लेकिन ये जो छोटी छोटी संस्थाएं हैं, छोटे छोटे गांवों में है, शहरों में है, ये कहीं ना कहीं दब जाते हैं, छिप जाते हैं। अगर इन्हें सपोर्ट मिलता है, मार्क स्पेंसर जैसे, कैटलिस्ट ग्रुप जैसे, स्वस्ति जैसे, अलग अलग भी बहुत सारी बड़ी संस्थाएं हैं, अगर उनका थोड़ा सा सपोर्ट मिलता है, तो सोचिए कि एक तो उनका सपोर्ट मिला और उनके अंदर उन्हें काम करने का मौका भी मिला। जहां हमें बड़ी सारी जिम्मेदारियां हैं, उन जिम्मेदारियों को वो पूरा भी कर लिए और उसको एक अपना पहचान भी मिल गया। तो ये अपेक्षा हमेशा रहती है कि आर्थिक के साथ साथ अपनी अनुभवों को ट्रेनिंग के जरिए, अपने विचारों के जरिए, मान सम्मान के जरिए, जहां ये लगे कि हम किसी के नीचे काम नहीं कर रहे, हम एक दूसरे के साथ एक दूसरे के लिए काम कर रहे हैं। जो सोच एक बड़ी संस्था की है कि हम बड़ा स्थापना किए हैं एक संस्था की, जहां हम लाखों करोड़ों में पैसे कमा रहे, या हमें देश भर के लोग जान रहे, कम से कम एक शहर की संस्था को भी हक है कि वो अपने काम को विकसित कर सके और लोगों को ये बता सके कि क्या हम गलत सोच रहे अपने समुदाय के लिए। अगर वो बड़ी संस्था मिल जाती है, यानी छोटी छोटी नदियां अगर सागर से मिलती हैं, नदियां सागर तो नहीं बनेंगी, लेकिन वो एक भी हो जाएंगे, क्योंकि नदी और सागर मिलके ही सागर बनते हैं। सागर कभी अकेला सागर नहीं हो पाता है। तो मेरी ये अपेक्षा है कि वो मान हो, सम्मान हो, जरूरत हो, सोच हो, उद्देश्य हो, वो एक होना चाहिए, चाहे संस्था बड़ी हो या संस्था छोटी हो। उसमें एसकेएस या एसकेएस जैसी कई सारी संस्थाएं हैं जिन्हें थोड़ी सी सपोर्ट की जरूरत है, और उन्हें ये महसूस दिलाने की कोशिश की जाए कि हम बराबर लेवल पे काम करें, जहां हम कंधे से कंधा मिला के एक मिशन को कामयाब बना रहे।
थैंक यू पूजा जी, आपने सारे क्वेश्चंस की आंसर दे दी और अभी हम वेबिनार बंद करवा लेंगे। थैंक यू सो मच पूजा जी. I'm going to open this up to the Q&A section because I think these are some really interesting questions that align with what we're saying. When we talk about scale, what have been some learnings that we've had in terms of, the importance of systems, networks, and connections so that such a model will be replicated? Thank you so much, Kranti, for such a great question. So I'll just try to frame this a little bit more for the panelists here. Meeting holistic health targets is obviously not easy. And if you are to take any complex problem, that's not easy. But in order to reach it at scale, we need to have, what have we learned about how systems, networks, and connections can be leveraged then? I'd like to open this up to maybe Shiv, and then Ranjeeb, if you'd like to add on anything.
Sure, thanks, Kranti, for that question. I think when we wanted to look at impact of primary healthcare in communities, what do we go and measure? Do we measure, for example, reduction in the days lost due to diarrhea? Do we look at maternal mortality? Do we look at diabetes and hypertension and other NCD management? There were hundreds of things one could look at. And the answer actually, Kranti, came to us from one of the painters in Mohammadpur, who, when we were standing in a medical shop, and I was interviewing the medical shop owner, and this elderly Muslim gentleman walked looking very tired and came to the medical shop owner and said, "Sir dukh raha hai, 20 rupai ki ilaj dena." Right? And each word meant a lot. Sir dukh raha hai, he is given a symptom. 20 rupai ki ilaj dena. Right? Now that means he wants a solution and he wants to get back to work. Right? And when I started chatting up with him, and I understood that he always gets headache whenever he's into painting. He actually has a paint allergy. right, which is causing his headache. And he takes a medicine because that is the job he is known for doing, right? And therefore, the answer for us clearly came from two things. One is people are treating symptom and paying as they go. How are we going to change this behavior into taking care of yourself and being proactive? That is the number one challenge. And the way we picked our result to answer your question is to look at healthy days. In slums like Mohammadpur, typically 30 to 60 days is lost for breadwinners because of health problems of their own or family members, right? And therefore, reducing that by half became our mission, right? Whether it is diarrhea, whether it is asthma, whether it is diabetes, how do you reduce unhealthy days? How do people manage their life better so that they are productive, and also not only physically, but also mentally, right? So that, became our kind of North Star indicator, which by the way is a WHO approved indicator. It's a healthy days is not something we came up with. So that became the kind of North Star. Radhika, over to you.
Thanks, Shiv. Ranjit, would you like to add anything at this point about, the importance of systems, networks, and connections for scale?
I think, Shiv made a very valid point, and I really concur. And then the example was very, very apt because, the same migrant worker perhaps, would be working in a factory. And the issues faced by them, because it's like, they have to work, right? And if they don't work, they don't get to, get their salary, for example. So from that perspective, the productivity of a worker could be also looked at, in terms of the healthy days the worker spends, and the number of days he is not able to work because of any of the symptoms or diseases. It has an impact on his overall, and so from that perspective, it does make sense that, that how do we actually ensure that, this programs like this, actually they are actually, maybe taken into a workplace situation, because from a community-based learning, the things are very, very similar. Of course, we cannot say that, this particular worker would be working in a particular supply base. Maybe the worker could be an automobile worker, but maybe to look at this from a lens of maybe a manufacturing setting or any other employee who is working where. So it makes maybe a good point for scale. That would be even my interpretation. Thank you.
Thanks, Ranjit. This next question from Indra seems to be quite apt for you, actually, Ranjit. So don't go on mute just yet. She wants to know, or he wants to know, they want to know, my bad, whether grassroots NGOs are able to speak the language that corporates want them to speak. Are they able to meet the expectations of the corporate sector in order to forge partnerships?
It's a very interesting question. In fact, a long time back, somebody told me, and in fact, I had the opportunity to meet quite a lot of organizations, and they would be specializing in a particular aspect. And, the grassroots NGOs play a very important role. I think that's why maybe, the concept of, what do you call it? The infrastructural approach, if I may use the word, becomes relevant. And then one of the things could be I don't want to comment on whether they can speak the language. I think everybody can speak the language the way they could. But from the perspective, we look at, if I talk about from a corporate perspective, we look at multi-dimensional objectives. And so that's why we need perhaps a swasti, but that doesn't stop us from maybe a swasti to actually maybe engage with millions of those specialist NGOs, if I may use the word, and maybe capacity build them, and help them to actually do their bit so that we can get a bigger impact.
Radhika, if I may make a quick point, I think it's a very important question that was just asked, but I think the opposite question needs to be asked as well. And Pooja Devi, we should ask her, कि how do we get corporates to speak their language? वो भी equally important question है मेरे हिसाब से.
Absolutely.
जब साथ में काम करना है तो both become important.
Absolutely. So maybe let's pose that to Pooja, right? Pooja Devi ji, जैसे कि क्वेश्चन अभी आया कि हम जो लोकल समितियां हैं, जो हम लोकल लेवल पे काम कर रहे हैं, क्या कॉर्पोरेट लोग हमारी भाषा समझ पा रहे हैं? पर गौरव जी ने बताया कि उल्टा क्वेश्चन पूछना चाहिए. तो आपको क्या लगता है कि क्या आप कॉर्पोरेट लोगों की भाषा समझ पा रहे हो? क्या वो आपके सेम भाषा बात कर रहे हैं? जैसे भाषा मतलब जो वर्ड्स यूज कर रहे हैं वो नहीं, पर जैसे कि आपकी, जैसे आपने बोला राइट, सम्मान से बात करना, वो सब. तो आपको क्या लगता है?
और पूजा, यहाँ कॉर्पोरेट से मतलब है मार्क्स एंड स्पेंसर जैसे हमारे पार्टनर्स.
जैसे कि ये बात है, उद्देश्य तो हमें पता चल जाता है और हमें साथ में काम भी करना होता है, पर हमारी भाषा भी कभी कभी हमारे बीच आती है, लेकिन वो ज्यादा मतलब परेशानी क्रिएट नहीं करती है, क्योंकि जब हम साथ में मिलके काम करते हैं तो हो सकता है मार्क स्पेंसर है जहाँ वो मैं अगर अपनी भाषा में हिंदी में कह रही हूँ, जैसे मुझे कंफर्टेबल महसूस हो रहा है, मैं हिंदी में बात कर रही हूँ, आप सभी इंग्लिश में बात कर रहे हैं, पर ऐसा नहीं है, मैं सारे इंग्लिश नहीं समझती तो थोड़ा बहुत हिंदी तो थोड़ा बहुत तो समझती हूँ. उसी तरीके से उम्मीद है कि मैं हिंदी में बात कर रही हूँ तो आप सभी मेरी कुछ बातों को तो समझते ही होंगे, मेरी भावनाओं को तो समझते ही होंगे, तो कुछ तो हम एक दूसरे की भावनाओं को ऐसे भी समझ लेते हैं. उसके बाद भी जब हम काम करते हैं तो हम एक दूसरे को, वो चाहे भाषा के को लेके हो या किसी भी चीज के लेके परेशानी जो होती है, हम दूसरे को शेयर करते हैं और उस शेयर से हमें वो सहायता भी मिलती है. अगर आपको लगता है कि पूजा नहीं समझ रहे तो आपको मेरे साथ काम करना है, तो आप कोशिश करेंगे कि पूजा को मैं किस तरीके से समझाऊं, एसपीएस को किस तरीके से मैं सपोर्ट करूं कि वो अच्छे से काम करे और वो लैंग्वेज उनके बीच ना आए काम के दौरान, हमारे लैंग्वेज, क्योंकि ये किसी एक हरियाणा या किसी एक बेंगलोर से रिलेटेड नहीं है, संस्थाएं अलग अलग जगहों के हैं, वो किसी भी देश से हो सकती है. तो
पूजा जी, मैं एक क्विक इस सवाल को थोड़ा सा चेंज करके आपके सामने प्रस्तुत करना चाहूंगा कि जो सवाल था वो भाषा को लेकर नहीं था. सवाल था कि क्या एमएनएस की बात नहीं कर रहे हैं, जनरल बात कर रहे हैं कि हमारे जो फंडिंग पार्टनर्स होते हैं, क्या वो हमारी जमीनी स्थिति को अच्छे से समझ पाते हैं. जैसे उनकी उम्मीद होती है कि हम उनकी रियलिटीज, उनकी जो हकीकत है उनको हम अच्छे से समझें. क्या वो हमारी जमीनी रियलिटीज, जमीनी जो हकीकत है वो अच्छे से समझ पाते हैं और वो समझने की कोशिश करते हैं?
हाँ, इसमें भी मैं मतलब मेरी हामी नहीं है, क्योंकि हम जिस क्षेत्र से जुड़ के काम करते हैं तो हमारी कोशिश है कि हम उन जमीनी हकीकतों को किसी भी बड़ी संस्था को जोड़े, उसको बताएं, और जो हमें सपोर्ट करता है तो वो बिना जाने या बिना समझे तो वो सपोर्ट करेंगे नहीं. तो उनकी भी कोशिश होती है कि वो जमीनी स्थितियों को समझे, उनकी परिस्थितियों को समझे. ये हो सकता है, जहां तक मैं समझती हूँ कि हो सकता है कि जिसमें हम जी रहे हैं और जिसको आप सुन रहे हैं उसमें थोड़ा फर्क हो सकता है, पर हम जब किसी बड़ी संस्था से सपोर्ट मांगते हैं तो मुझे उम्मीद है कि उन्हें 100% नहीं तो 90% तो पता होता ही है कि हमारे ग्रामीण क्षेत्र में, हमारे समुदाय में उनकी जमीनी स्थिति, उनकी परेशानी, उनकी समस्या या वो किस तरीके से हल किया जा सकता है, इस पे विचार करते हैं या समझते हैं.
Thank you, Pooja ji. Let's shift the radar a little bit through another question that's come in from Ajish. Ajish wants to know how partnerships or engagements have actually shifted post FCRA and CSR amendments. I think a lot of people here work in the space. It's a very relevant question. Opening it out to anyone here who might want to take that.
I can take that. favorite subject for most not-for-profits, and also the painful discussion too. I think Indian CSR does not have the restrictions that does not fall within the FCRA. But there is a very interesting twist to it, right? If 51% of the company is held by foreign equity, it's technically can be termed as a foreign company, and therefore the money given in India could also be treated as FCRA. Now, these are all very interpretable grounds which require experts and governments to clarify continuously. But Indian companies which have been providing CSR money do not really fall within that particular gambit. And but that said, obviously, if it is a foreign company, for example, Swasti works with Merck for Mothers, and if money from the US entity is given, either from the company or from the foundation, obviously it will be, under the FCRA rules, which one of the challenges is, among the many challenges, is that no subgranting is allowed, and therefore the core entity receiving it will have to spend. So that's one part. I think I see the FCRA challenge also as an opportunity for Indian CSRs to step up and move their funding into a much more higher level. And I think for Ranjeev, I think he has two streams of funding, if I'm not wrong, both from the UK Foundation and the India Foundation. So I think it's also unique. He has that advantage when to use the the prioritized foreign funding vis-a-vis Indian funding based on the objectives. I think there are not many corporations, not all corporations will have that advantage for sure. So the opportunity that I see for Indian CSRs is that there is a gap which needs to be filled, and that definitely, given a booming Indian economy, which seems to be doing the probably the best in the world now, Gaurav and Ranjeev, in terms of growth rates. I think I'm quite gung ho that if Marks and Spencer like CSRs can show the way, I think CSR should actually look at doubling and tripling their money, not directly by putting more, but actually leveraging their money for impact investments, right? Bringing in other kinds of capital into the market and using their money for securitization, FLDG, and those kind of instruments. I see a lot of opportunities, I think, but CSR Act also needs to allow these companies to do that, which is a big constraint at this moment.
Thanks, Shiv. Would anyone else like to add on? Ranjeev, Gaurav, if you'd like to as well. All right, great. Great questions coming in. Parul has a very interesting question around ensuring quality while scaling up. So, this is a debate that we constantly have within the organization as well. So how do you ensure quality while we're looking at scaling up? And, how do you ensure appropriate HR for, the effective processing and implementation of such programs at scale?
Probably I'll leave it for Ranjeev to start us off, or Smriti, because I can come in, but I will be coming on too many questions. So Ranjeev, would you like to look at the scaling? Because Marks and Spencer itself is a great example of scale.
Yeah, I mean, we did talk about, and then of course, as Swasti, you have already scaled this program. I think the scaling should be looked at from a lens. One, of course, we would want, as discussed, Shiv, that that it makes sense to continue to be involved, if I may use the word, in the flagship program. I think that is where it was the ground zero, right? And then ground zero is always important to be associated with. I think the program, the whole landscape has changed, and so that part would continue. I mean, even if it's the quantum of funding maybe can come down over a period of time, so that money could be actually then used in the scaling up. The other could be also looking at maybe, because it's a partnership model, so it makes sense to also invite cross-sectoral funding. And that could be a very good model of scaling up, in which, because I think one of the I think, issues, if I may use the word, and which people are now seeing maybe that it needs to be addressed is about, my way, or maybe let's say MNS way of doing things. I think those things are changing. You have a landscape, you have, you want to make a industry wide impact, and the scale cannot be achieved if you are so fixated about that, okay, this is my thing and I'll continue to do it. I mean, it was so funny to see certain organizations looking at patenting leadership. I mean, who patents leadership? I mean, these are 3,000-year-old skills. Who can patent proactiveness, for example? So a good model of scale, and I think we have been discussing of late, is to look at a collaborative approach. And it's important to bring in the like-minded partners. That's also very important, I think, because you have to be involved with your heart and soul. That's how you actually achieve the impact, and that's how you stop measuring efforts and start measuring impacts. And that can be only achieved when we collaboratively come together. And that's why one of the reasons was when Migros came in, I think Swasti and Marks and Spencer had a joint call with them. So that's where the spirit of partnership comes in. So that's a very good model of scaling, I guess.
Yeah, I think Ranjiv's point around collaborative impact and also not this ownership stake building approach. Ranjiv, in Catalyst 2030, the language of generosity, right, is very, very, has been very critical. But to Parul's point, Parul, we struggled with this. We, in societal platform language, they say what works in scale versus what can be scaled, right? So these are two different paradigms. So one of the things we did was to deconstruct the model into non-contextual pieces, and then look at what are those contextual pieces that we need to look at, right? For example, when we took Mohammadpur to Lesotho, right, the issues of Mohammadpur vis-a-vis issues in Lesotho were completely different. Right, it was malaria, which was a big problem. It was HIV, which was a big problem, right? So, or when we worked with, farmers, they said skin conditions are the number one issue for them because they spray fertilizer and therefore that affects them. So I think we were able to contextualize certain things, and certain things were very common. When people are sick, they want prompt, immediate, good quality, affordable, accessible treatment, right? That doesn't change anywhere in the world. Right. And therefore, we were able to deconstruct and construct wherever it's possible. It's been a challenge, honestly, Parul. But I think the fact that we've gone to around 30 centers is also because we were able to do the deconstruction and construction reasonably well.
Thanks, Shiv. Thanks, Ranjit. Very interesting points around, we use this term very often in the Catalyst group, no egos, no logos, and that actually goes on to answer a couple of questions there on the chat from Tripti as well. At this point, I'd like to request that we bring in Shameen Prashantam. Shameen is actually a business school professor who studied corporate startup partnering. He's even written a book called Gorillas Can Dance, a very interesting name. And part of his work actually relates to how corporates partner with social enterprises as well, as part of SDG 17. So, Shameen, welcome to this discussion. It's truly, thank you for joining us. I know that you do a lot of work in spaces like China as well. We were just talking about what makes partnerships stick, right? What are the factors that contribute to this? And there have been a number of them that have shown up so far. But we'd love to hear from you about this role that the social enterprise can also play in partnerships such as these.
Well, thank you so much, Radhika. I've been enjoying listening to some of the Q&A, and obviously this has been a very engaging panel. So hello to everyone from Shanghai. And I've been doing some work for a few years about how multinationals and startups have been engaging. And in that context, a subset of these startups are social enterprises. A lot of this work actually was in Africa, but I've also seen some excellent examples in India. And so this phenomenon is absolutely vital. One of the things that I observed about the overall phenomenon of large corporates and startups partnering together is that there's what I call the paradox of asymmetry. So as these big companies started feeling the force of disruption, say from digitalization and other such trends, they began to realize that they need to be entrepreneurial, and part of that could be engaging with entrepreneurship on the outside. But the paradox that I found was that many of these companies discovered that the very differences between them, the big companies who are not as agile but have scale and reputation, and the startups that do have the agility but not the scale, those very differences that made it attractive to work together also made it challenging. And so these understanding what these asymmetries are and then addressing them seems to be what the companies that have partnered effectively with startups have done. And I put this together in a book called Gorillas Can Dance. So with apologies to all the fine panelists from the big corporations, but the reason I call it that is many years ago when I was asking Professor C.K. Prahlad while he was alive whether it makes sense to study this phenomenon, he said many startups don't have an option. They must learn to dance with the big gorillas. And in that context, the challenges seems to be even greater once you bring in this additional dimension of social impact, because you, as it is, have asymmetries to deal with when it's a big corporation and a smaller entrepreneurial firm, just normally when you're looking for economic outcomes. But then when you add on the social dimension as well, then it becomes even more challenging. And so what I found was those same principles of overcoming the asymmetries, asymmetries of goal, asymmetries of structure, asymmetries of gaining attention. The challenge is even slightly more complex. There's this added layer of making sure that the synergies that are identified should also have the societal impact. The interfaces that are put in place, the partner interfaces, should be more inclusive to involve other actors as well. So for example, in Africa, I found that the United Nations agencies like UNICEF, as well as some telecoms companies, when they were engaging with social enterprises, they would rope in an NGO called Reach for Change to help in the process of engaging with the startups because they had more expertise, they were more credible. And finally, finding exemplars or success stories that demonstrate both the economic and the social aspect. So that's basically, in a nutshell, what I found and I discuss in this book, Gorillas Can Dance. But what I'm hearing from the panelists is basically there's just so much potential that is being realized, and it is from we learn from the lessons of the people who are walking the talk rather than talking about it, and what little I've been able to glean from this panel is extremely encouraging.
Thank you so much, Ramin. We have a couple more minutes for a few more questions, and just extending off of this sort of line of conversation. We'd like to sort of know from, I think this was Ajish's question, what is the landscape looking like? What are the trends in the sector? Who are the players? How does better collaboration actually take place? Are we seeing examples of that across the sector? What we presented to you was obviously one such example, but are there any other examples of such collaboration taking place?
Is the question for the panelists or?
Yes, for the panelists.
Okay, I think I know Ranjeev is very aware, even in a sector like apparel, so many collaborations. Rajiv, you want to give it a shot, sir?
So, yeah, I mean, I think there are scores of examples from the apparel sector. And this was, of course, a live example. But, multiple stakeholders. In fact, they are continuously collaborating in the apparel sector, whether to look at issues within the supply chain, for example. So maybe a good example, recent example could be one of the states in India where the DNS allowance was increased for the factories, and the government, because the manufacturers said, it was COVID times 2020, and they went to the government and they said maybe this could be delayed, and government actually came up with a notification, and the whole implementation was delayed, and the NGOs and the civil society went to the court. And after 1 year, I think the industry decided, okay, maybe it's bygone be bygones, and maybe start afresh. There, I think, it was escalated to the brands and retailers. We all came together along with multi-stakeholder initiatives. And, we did a little bit of advocacy together. And finally, the industry realized and they paid. So this is one way of a rights-based collaborative approach. The other collaborative approach is also understanding stakeholders. I think a lot of times, we stakeholders are at loggerheads. And then it is essentially because maybe, there's this issue of non-understanding one sector to other. Maybe a retailer or a business may not understand our trade union, and vice versa. Or for that matter, an NGO and a union may be at loggerheads, or maybe a manufacturer, for example, would have a problem with the brand. So I think 3 or 4 years ago, and that is again being repeated, and we are trying to actually recreate that magic, where a unique collaborative approach was brought in, where the idea was to actually provide a safe space to all these conflicting stakeholders coming together. And the first point was actually that how do we connect as individuals? Because at the end of the day, a unionist is a human being, a person representing a brand is a human being, and so a person from the CSO. And in fact, for the first time, it was a very, very interesting exercise where individuals started knowing each other and understanding the pain points and the issues from each other's perspective. In fact, it was a process driven, and in fact, a conflict management organization was employed, and each stakeholder had to sign an NDA to be part of that platform. So of course, this is a very, very unique and an extreme form, which you can only see in the garment sector. So, but I think it could serve as two powerful examples how collaboration can work, apart from, of course, what we are already talking about. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ranjeev. I'm going to go to a really interesting question as the last question before we close out, aptly the exit strategy. So I think this question was from Abhishek. Abhishek wants to know, in this entire program that we designed, was there a planned timely exit strategy, or is the plan to stay on forever? Shiv, would you like to?
Oh, it's a question I love. So do we plan to exit out of our life? No. Do we plan to exit out of our livelihood? Yes, during retirement. This construct of exit versus as sustainability, I would seriously challenge it. To me, Pooja Devi, like leaders running SKS, gaining strength to strength, and they leading and we taking a supportive role, to me, is sustainability. And our role as Swasti will change and should change, but we do not believe in exit. We do not believe in not keeping our promises, which we work with the community. Unless the community says, we are done, we're good. We don't need any more support. We don't believe in walking away. In fact, we have the opposite of exit. We call it commitment to the community, right? And if Marks and Spencer, for whatever reason, like another brand actually, stopped our funding, and I don't want to name the brand right now, but we continue with that community because that's the kind of commitment you need for the change that you need to make for long-term growth. So rather than talk about exit, we should talk about commitment. Rather than talk about exit, we should talk about sustainability. Rather than talk about exit of the facilitators, we should talk about the people taking central role in what they are doing, right? And I believe Marks and Spencer will have a role, but the role will change, right? And that is very, very important. And to my mind, I think these lexicons need to be interrogated a little bit more to say what does exit mean, what does sustainability mean, and therefore. There was if I were to just look at our work with the sex workers for the last 15 years, have we exited? Probably not, because they took a promise from us that we would need your support as we move along. But that doesn't mean we are taking away their money or their space. That is very important, right? We have constantly moved backwards and brought the community in the front. And the community is able to manage it, not as a front, but as core, right? And therefore, I don't believe in exits. I will be with Pooja Devi and leaders like her as long as they want us. In fact, we will need Pooja Devi to come with us to replicate many of the things that we are doing.
Thank you so much, Shiv. Before I close out and exit for today, I'd like to sort of summarize my key takeaways from this discussion. I think from Ranjeev, just, recognizing that learning comes from complexity and actually how rewarding the process can be to actually involve partners in the journey of learning itself, and, the role that they can play as well. From Pooja Devi, I actually learned today about how, the partners are like the 5 different fingers on our hand, and sort of recognizing that each of them are different and embracing that difference is really what helps partnerships grow. Shiv, from you, obviously, the fact that, communities this should be at the center of every single partnership, without which nothing can really go to scale. And Shamin, thank you so much for that insight about that power of the paradox of asymmetry. I'm going to go back and do a lot more reading about that as well. So thank you so much. Before we close out, Gaurav, any last thoughts before we wrap up?
Just wanted to maybe wrap up with quick thoughts from Ranjeev and Shiv on a particular thought that I've always carried into sessions like this. We started by saying that partnerships are super important. Without that, we can't talk about sticky change. We can't talk about change at scale. And one big part about partnerships is truly understanding the role of each of the partners. So maybe I want to end with this quick question. Ranjeev, Shiv, to you, what do you think is the role of a corporate partner in, let's say, because health is today's topic, in ensuring good quality healthcare for all? And Ranjeev, to you, what is the role of civil society organizations in ensuring that we are able to give good quality healthcare to all? So just maybe end with quick thoughts from both of you.
Okay, I would say, healthy profits of corporates need to be converted into healthy days for communities. I see that as a big role for corporates to do that and do it in scale. And I think Marks and Spencer has shown the way that it can be done, right? And you can do it in not only scale with a social return on investment, which is 360% and plus. Right, and I'm very enthused by that, Gaurav. I think a lot more can be done in that sphere. To me, is there only one way to look at well-being? No, there should be 1,000 different ways to do it too. And that's why the model we have done in Mohammadpur, we have put it out in Creative Commons for anybody to take, copy, modify, adapt, and teach us back. What did you learn in terms of how it works? So that's my take on it, Gaurav.
Ranjeev, what is the role of civil society organizations in ensuring good quality health for all?
I think civil society organizations, like what Swasti has demonstrated, I think the expectation is that, they provide holistic solutions, because one of the things that always come into our minds is that, because they are the knowledge partners, in certain cases, they are the subject matter specialists. As corporates, we align. I think most corporates, they need to be also very clear what they want, which we know what we want as a company, as a responsible company. But from a civil society partner, as Swasti has time again demonstrated, that it's important that provide holistic solution instead of piecemeal solutions. So, for example, if we break well-being and health into two different aspects, and maybe give one corporate well-being and the other corporate health, end of the day, the landscape doesn't benefit in a nutshell. So it's important that okay, fine, and then that would be actually then a magnet for other corporates to also come in and then look at doing their bit, and then we can achieve scale. I think scale is the ultimate goal, which actually helps benefit everybody. Sarva loka sukhino bhavantu, what they say, right? And you also get benefited. Thank you.
Thank you. Radhika.
Radhika, may I say something for 10 seconds?
Absolutely.
I think Gaurav's question was just such a good one. And one of the concepts that I talk about in my book is called the division of entrepreneurial labor. And basically, this discussion for the last 3-4 minutes is really about that. And I think figuring out what each party is able to do best and how by then harnessing the efforts of the other, something can be achieved which neither can do on their own, I think is essentially what is being talked about. And this whole theme of shifting the narrative, I think is really about recognizing this, so that what is now generally business as unusual will over time become business as usual, because I think this is such a critical part of SDG 17, Partnerships for the Goals. And I mean, this event, I congratulate everybody who's been involved, and Sanyukta, who brought this to my attention. I think this is just such an encouraging start.
Thank you so much, Shamin. More takeaways for me, but on that note, thank you so much, everyone who's participated in this panel, the panelists, Ranjit, Shiv, Pooja, thank you so much. Smriti, thank you for that wonderful presentation. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Catalyst 2030, ISDM, and obviously the entire team behind this event. Thank you for the time and effort that went into this. This has been a truly enriching discussion, and I've taken away a lot, if not anyone else. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Leave kar दीजिए.